Hi, everybody. We are so excited to be talking to you today about our Zin Lovers Club wines. It feels like forever since we've seen you guys. My name is Sarah Rathbun. If you don't already know me, I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at Dry Creek Vineyard. And we're just so bummed we haven't seen you guys in so long that we really thought it would be fun to kind of jump on the train of virtual tastings and try to bring a little bit of the winery to you. So we are going to do a couple things here just to let you guys know of what's going to be happening during this Zoom. For right now, everybody is muted just so we can kind of keep a little, just keep things a little orderly. We do have the Zoom webinar chat function going. So if you have questions, I see there's already some questions and a little hi comment. So please go ahead and send us messages through there and we'll do our best to address all of those questions that you have. Thank you to everyone who already sent in questions ahead of time. That was really great to give us some ideas of what you were interested in hearing about. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Bell, our winemaker, and we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I just want to get some feedback from you guys before I turn it over to Tim. We're going to try doing some screen shares of some photos of the vineyards. So if for some reason you're not able to see something clearly or you're not able to hear us, please use that chat function and let us know so that we can make sure that we get it ready for you. All right, without further ado, I'll pass it over to our winemaker, Tim Bell.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Well, this is kind of my maiden voyage on doing this kind of tasting with you all, but I did want to tell you, just as Sarah has said, how much we really miss all of you. I really am looking forward to the day when we can be together and have hugs and enjoy some wines, and hopefully we won't have to be 6 feet apart the whole time. But this is really fun. I'm looking forward to it. Have an opportunity to share some things about all these wines and about Zinfandel and Dry Creek in general. And I'm really looking forward to your input. Your comments, your questions. Like Sarah said, I've got a few already, but anything comes up during this time, I would really welcome your input. That'll make it a lot more interesting, I think, for all of us. And so here we go. You know, before we get into, you know, we're going to discuss 4 different Zinfandels today. But before we get into that, I did want to just talk a little bit about what's going on here at the winery and in the vineyards right now. And so, you know, right now we're actually doing some bottling. And so what's been really great fun is that we have people from the tasting room staff who are helping us with bottling right now. So we've got Ian and Darren, Paige, you know, different people that you know and love. Cole has been helping out a lot too. And Jack here and there as well, as he's available with school and all. And it's been a really great energy. I think for the people doing this, a character building experience. Yeah, it's working on the bottling line, and it's machines, and they want to go, and so you got to keep up. And it's really great, you know, just seeing some wine come together and know that it's really our whole family that's putting this together, from the guys in the cellar to the team in the tasting room, and it's a labor of love. So. Aside from that, right now is just an incredibly beautiful time in the vineyard, and Sarah is sharing this screenshot. I took this photo yesterday out in DCV2, so this is right in front of the winery. And we've planted a cover crop that has this really nice flower mix this year. And there's a lot of sweet pea coming up. You can see a poppy there. And just today, a lot of red clover is starting to show itself. It's really beautiful. And I really wish that you could all be here to see that. But we wanted to share that with you. And you know, I've been spending a lot of time walking through the vineyards around here the last few weeks. And you know, for some reason, it's really hit me in this time when all this stuff is happening to us, just the incredible life force that is going on out there. And not just in the vineyard, but you know, the trees all around, the birds all around the vineyard. You know, it's just sometimes kind of overwhelming. All the bird song that I'm hearing, and I look down in the plants on the ground and in the edge of the vineyard, and there's a ladybug, and here's some other bugs, and there's just a lot of life going on. Hummingbirds are buzzing me regularly, zooming over my head, and the insectary is full of life as well. So somehow that's giving me a lot of sort of courage and hope. And I just wanted to tell you about that. I hope you're experiencing the same thing too in your gardens or whatever nature you're surrounded with at home. It's been really great. And like I said, it'll be beautiful when you come back. We'll still be here. So, we're going to get into 4 different wines. We've got 3 2017 wines that we'll taste first, and then we'll finish with the 2018 old vine. And I thought I might just start maybe with discussing a question that was sent in earlier by David. And he wanted to talk about our history with Zinfandel. And so, the first vintage for Dry Creek Vineyard was in 1972. And I actually had a chance to talk to David Stair briefly today about that and about the history with Zinfandel. That's great that Dave is like literally living right across the street from the winery right now. Am I supposed to say that? I don't know. Don't show up on his doorstep. But in 1972, we only made whites. And that was for a couple of reasons. One, David said, I didn't have unlimited funds, so I needed wines that were going to be out in the marketplace fairly quickly. But he always appreciated Dry Creek Valley for its red wines as well. And he had actually intended to make some Zinfandel in 1972 and maybe some Cab. But the Zinfandel and Cab did not ripen until late. I guess it was a late season, and there was like 2 weeks straight of rain at the near the end of the season, and kind of just put the kibosh on all hopes of making some nice red wine for a debut vintage. So we waited until 1973, and that's when we first made our first Zinfandels. And he actually made 2 different Zinfandels. He made one that was sort of a Beaujolais style, so basically kind of a carbonic maceration, very young, fruity, early drinking wine. And then the second one was the label that Sarah just put up, which is, we call it the heavier style red wine. And it came from couple of vineyards here. Jasper Long was one of the vineyard growers, and then Lewis Norton over on Lit Springs Road was the other vineyard. And we still actually today are buying Merlot, not Zinfandel, but Merlot from the Long family as well. So Jasper's son, Rick, is still tending those vines. And so we've had a long history. And so that's kind of our start with Zinfandel. And it was a pretty small production at the beginning. Of course, everything was, and we've grown over the years. But yeah, so it's been a good journey. We added Cab the next year in 1974. And I know Dave said, a couple years down the road, we settled into having Zinfandel from an old vine vineyard owned by the Richwagon family. And that was a mainstay for us for many years and became the basis of our first old vine Zinfandel bottling. So that's a little bit about our history with Zinfandel. And I think without any further ado, maybe we'll jump into tasting some wine. So I know having all 4 wines open at once is probably a big ask, and you might not even have them all yet. So, but if you do have a Zinfandel, I hope you open up the glass and enjoy along with me as we're tasting through these. And if you have some questions or comments about some other Zinfandels that you're enjoying at home from Dry Creek Vineyard, certainly welcome to field those questions as well. So we're going to start with the 2017 Summers Zinfandel. I've got a glass right here. And this wine is, well, first of all, let's talk about 2017 in general. So, there's some wine vintages where it's pretty easy and the wines kind of make themselves. 2017 wasn't necessarily one of those. We did have some really great rains in the winter and early spring, which ended several years of drought. So that was great. We saw lots of growth in the vineyards, but then we had some weather during set that kind of cut down on the crop. So it wasn't actually a very good crop. And then somewhere along June and July, we had some heat spikes that led to a little bit of early shrivel. And when you get that early shrivel, what you don't get is like high sugar raisins. You get, because the grapes are a very low sugar, somewhere around June, July, and there's a lot of acid. So, and because it's so early, you know, there'll probably be a few berries at the top where the, you know, the bunch is most exposed to the sun, and they'll just kind of die off. And so they don't really have much of an effect. And we kind of had a little bit later start. So it was about 5 to 8 days later than average, at least the last several preceding vintages, because it was some cooler weather. But, you know, then, you know, we were harvesting some Sauvignon Blanc, kind of waiting for Zinfandel to get going. And then Mother Nature, you know, threw us a curveball, and we had probably about, I think it was like a 5-day heat spell, right at the end of August. And I was looking up some reflecting on that, looking back at what we did in 2017. And I remember that we did, it was like almost 60%, just under 60% of our harvest within about, I think it was like a 14, 15-day window right there, starting August 28th. And so basically we did, you know, kind of close to 2/3 of our harvest in about 1/3 of the total time. Like we had, you know, that year harvest lasted for about 57 days, almost 60 days. So, the kicker was we were also bottling some wine at the time. And it was the first vintage for our assistant winemaker, Brian Pruitt. So that was kind of a baptism by fire, no pun intended. But anyhow, it was a really somewhat challenging and interesting vintage. But the wines are really, you know, big and concentrated. So Summers Zinfandel. This is a photo that Sarah's put up of George Summers' vineyard. And the portion on the right side of the screen, kind of that slope there that you see, is where we do sometimes harvest some of the fruit, and then kind of just over behind that as well is one of the main blocks. And then up to the left on the other side at the top of that hill, and you see some pine trees in the background. We have another block there, and then the Petit Syrah is right below that block of Zinfandel. And we didn't used to get Petit Syrah from Summers, but I kept bugging George Summers about it, and eventually some became available, and that was really great. So we had it available as a blender. If you do have the Summers or whatever you're drinking, please enjoy.
Hey, Tim, we've had a couple questions saying we have someone who has the 2016 Summers wondering how it compares. And then we also have Kent, who's drinking the 2014 version of this. So kind of how do you feel like the difference of the vintage are, or how long do you think they'll last?
Well, it's interesting that it's 2014 and 2016, because those both were somewhat similar vintages in my mind. They weren't, you know, super dense, big wines, but they were it was actually pretty nice growing conditions overall and pretty balanced wines. So they should be drinking really nicely now. And, you know, the 2014, you know, I'd probably feel like I would drink it probably over the next 2 to 4 years. The 2016, you know, maybe a little bit longer than that, a couple years out further. And the 2017 it's a big wine. It's one of the bigger Summers Zinfandels that we've made in recent memory. You know, it's been a little while since I actually visited these wines, since we put them in the bottle last year. And when I tasted it just before we went live today, I was really kind of like, oh, wow, that's a mouthful, and a delicious mouthful, I think, too.
And so, where would you tell people that Summers is located? That's another question somebody was asking, is where exactly in the Dry Creek Valley is Summers Ranch?
Good question. Yeah, so it's on Norton Road, and it's kind of at the south east part of the valley proper. You know, there's kind of, you know, we've got this long narrow valley, Dry Creek Valley, which just reminded me I meant to have a topo map here, but I forgot that. But anyhow, it's a long narrow valley, and kind of down at the bottom is in the hills is where Summers Vineyard is. So you saw that it's got some definite slope there. There's not a lot of flat ground there. It's all pretty much hillside. And it's actually fairly close to our Spencer's Hill Vineyard. It's not too far across sort of a little valley there. But it's, you know, out there at the end of Norton Road, it's just like this kind of small country road, one-lane road. You know, actually turns to dirt after you get off of Dry Creek Road for a while. It's kind of its own little world. It's really, you kind of feel like you're out there a little bit and away from everything. In fact, I'm going to share something here too. So this is a vial of some soil from Summers Vineyard. And you can see kind of a really red color to that. There's a lot of red, fluffy, iron-rich soil there, and some good rocks to make it well drained. And it's also planted to the Mazzoni Selection of Zinfandel that we have in 3 of our estate vineyards. And you know, as you know, Summers and those other vineyards are the basis of the heritage vines Zinfandel as well. So yeah, it's a really great spot. Was there another question about it?
There was one other question. I don't know if you want to address it now or later, asking kind of how is the quality of the drought years versus the wet years as far as Zin are concerned?
Well, I think you know, every year is just different and has its own personality, which is one of the things that's really exciting to me as a winemaker and makes it interesting. So, you know, it's really hard to characterize a drought year versus a non-drought year as being, you know, exactly like this way or that way. I mean, if in general, you know, a drought year, probably you'll have a little bit more concentration in the fruit, because if you are able to irrigate, you may still have to sort of, you know, meter out the water a little more carefully to the vines. You know, because you're worried about running out, obviously, right? Especially in a vineyard like Spencer's, where we don't have a well, we're just collecting runoff. So I guess that might be the thing, is, you know, maybe a drought year a little more concentrated, maybe you get a little more balance and elegance in a non-drought year, but there's so many variables all along the way about, you know, how big a crop you have, and, you know, how hot or how cold it is, and all those factors, and when rain shows up, even if it's not that much at different times of the growing season. A lot of factors there. You know, but the Summers too, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about George Summers himself. He's actually a very quiet guy, and, you know, probably, I think, pretty humble. But I love working with George. He doesn't say much, but he's pretty unflappable, pretty calm all the time. And you know, he'll haul the fruit in often himself, which is one of those great sort of throwbacks where, you know, a lot of vineyards today, you know, maybe hire some other trucking company or have a vineyard management company, and there's a little bit more separation between the owner and you as the winery. But George is very much involved. He has, you know, he gets a little bit of outside help, but he has his own small crew of guys, and they know that vineyard very well. And you know, when he rolls across the scale during harvest, our cellar master Jerry likes to joke with him a little bit. You know, he'll tell him some dirty jokes, or he'll say, you know, "Hey George, you're looking good today," and then he'll pull out the water hose and squirt George in the truck. And George just laughs. He takes it all in stride. He seems to appreciate the sense of humor. But we have a lot of fun. You know, just wanted to tell you too, one thing about this blend. So it's 82% Zinfandel and 18% Petite Syrah. And we also, in 2017, you know, we're always kind of playing around with yeasts and different yeast sources as winemakers. That's one of the things that makes it fun for us. But we used a couple of different yeasts that were isolated from the Rhone Valley for the 2017 summers. And yeah, really like how this wine comes out. And when I was tasting it earlier, I was just kind of dreaming of what food might go with this. And what came to me was something like a pasta with a cream sauce with some really nice mushrooms, you know, especially if you were able to get some nice foraged mushrooms, or you know, just something besides the cremini or the usual white ones, and something with some richness and flavor and a little bit of earthiness to it. I think that would really just make the fruit pop and shine in this wine. All right, any other questions we should address at the moment?
No, let's go on to the Farmhouse. I believe you were saying it's the second one.
Yeah, Farmhouse. I'm going to grab my glass here. Yeah, so this vineyard is kind of our lone estate Zinfandel vineyard in Russian River Valley appellation. So it's a little bit south of the winery and a slightly cooler region. And it also happens to be a vineyard where we have a small cottage where some of our winemaking interns spend a few months during harvest often. Mostly been South Africans there, although we've had the occasional Australian, or last year some Argentinians. But I'm sure there's a lot that's gone on there that I just don't know about and probably don't want to know about. So good thing the walls can't talk. But it's kind of a really nice spot. So the vineyard is on some nice rolling hills, and kind of at one edge down by the road kind of slopes down to some clay soil, really kind of gray clay soil. But you can see in this photo here that Sarah's sharing that there's a lot of rocks in that vineyard. So, you know, up on this higher kind of gentle rolling hill where these Zinfandel vines are located. So we've got really fairly rocky soil, a lot of pebbles strewn all through that. And this vineyard really has a distinctive character. You know, it's so interesting to me that we've got 3 different vineyards planted with the Mazzoni Selection, and they're all in different areas of Sonoma County, 2 here in Dry Creek Valley, and 1 this farmhouse in Russian River, and they all really display distinctly different personalities. And I often get, you know, in the flavor more than the aroma in this wine, a lot of sort of spice and black pepper. You know, when I was tasting this earlier today, I was just noticing this really has some nice bright acid and black cherry and sort of chocolate cocoa qualities to it. Yeah, that's a really nice, balanced and fresh, bright fruit Zinfandel. Very different from the summers that we just had. So there's one interesting fact about this vineyard that we don't talk about a whole lot. This was one of the last vineyards that we planted with the Mazzoni Selection. That and Spencer's Hill were kind of around the same time frame, within a year or 2, in the late 90s. When they were planting the vineyard, you know, we had all these cuttings or buds that they had to bud over the vines with to this Mazzoni Selection. Actually ran out on a few of the last rows. So there's about, I think, 4 to 8 rows that are actually a couple of other heritage selections. They were able to source some wood from a vineyard called Val Rossi, which is an old vine vineyard in Sonoma Valley, and also from Papiano. And I don't know exactly where that vineyard is, but I'm assuming it's the Papiano family. And it's a very small section of the vineyard, so the vast majority is the Mazzoni. But I always thought that was kind of an interesting fact that we've got this other little flavor ingredient in there as well. I think it makes it really cool. And we've got those particular rows marked so that we know which ones they are. You know, this is some really nice loamy soil. And often we get this vineyard, for some reason, and I don't know why. I've asked the vineyard guys and they haven't been able to give me an answer. We get a lot of berries scattered throughout some of the bunches that are very small. So, you know, when berries form, they'll have, you know, several seeds inside. But sometimes the seed doesn't fully form, or only maybe 1 seed forms. And for some reason that in the physiology of the vine, it influences the size of the berries. And so when you don't get a seed at all, like it kind of starts to form and stops, or you just maybe get 1 seed, then you get a very small berry. And so people sometimes, I think, call that sort of hens and chicks. You've got some big, you know, the usual big Zinfandel berries, and then the really tiny ones scattered throughout the clusters. And I just got to think that that's part of the character of this vineyard too, that makes its flavors distinct and unique. I was just remembering too that one interesting aspect of this that plays into our sustainability with this vineyard is that it's actually all irrigated by recycled water that is, you know, has been made available by the nearby city of Windsor. And so, you know, it's a nice sustainable fact about this that we're using water twice. And I suppose if it keeps going through the cycle, maybe more than once. I don't know exactly how they're collecting it, but yeah, it's a really great vineyard. You know, one of the facts, I think the fact that it has some really bright fruit is there's not Petit Syrah as part of this vineyard. So, you know, it's just a real nice pure expression of Zinfandel.
Hey, Tim, we had a question about what exactly is the Mazzoni Selection? That's
a good question. I should explain that. So This all came back about a number of years ago, kind of starting in the 80s when, the winery was, really valuing Zinfandel. Old vine Zinfandel hadn't really become a valued thing yet. And there was actually a lot of old vine vineyards that were being removed and planted to higher yielding younger vineyards, maybe even different varieties, just because, Zinfandel was kind of on the ropes a little bit. And so, in an effort to preserve the quality of those old vine vineyards and honestly to try to get maybe some really special character in some newer vineyards, the winery sourced some cuttings from a vineyard called Mazzoni. And it was really partly born out of, Don Wallace will tell you, born out of a frustration with the available selections, which were pretty limited at that time and not the highest quality. It took a really painstaking process of planting these vines, these cuttings from that vineyard, which actually later was removed after we obtained those cuttings, and growing them up over a number of years. And you want to grow them up, see that you've got which vines look healthiest and free of viruses or any kind of disease, and then take cuttings and buds off of those and grow more vines until you get a lot of buds so you can plant a vineyard. We don't know a whole lot about this vineyard other than I've heard some stories. There was a local gentleman, I think it was Louis Pastori, who our vineyard manager, Duff Bevel, has spoken to. And I think it was Louis that said he had some photos of himself as a young man in that vineyard. And that was in the 1920s, and the vineyard was fully mature. So it has to be a little bit older than that. So it was a pretty old vineyard, and it's a unique selection that you don't run into very much around here. I've encountered maybe one other vineyard in the valley besides our own that was planted to this selection. So for us, it's been a really great way to preserve the heritage of an old vine vineyard that doesn't exist anymore. It's a unique selection, like I said, that is very unusual. We've made it the basis of our heritage vine Zinfandel. And as we've moved into these single vineyard wines, then you get to see the personality of the vineyard in that combination with the same selection. So the four vineyards that it's planted in besides Summers, the estate vineyards are Wallace Ranch, the DCV7, and that was our first estate vineyard planted to that selection. And then there's the Farmhouse Vineyard that we just were talking about, also known as DCV8. And then the last one is Spencer's Hill. So that's also planted to that Mazzoni selection. Yeah.
One question was asking where exactly is Farmhouse located? And I think that's an interesting question because this is actually the only Zinfandel that we make that's a Russian River Valley Zinfandel.
Yeah, so it's as I said, it's in the Russian River appellation, and specifically if you're on Highway 101 and you take Shiloh Road exit and you head straight out west on Shiloh Road, and go all the way to the end until it comes to a T, and basically just a little bit north of there is the Farmhouse Vineyard, and it's just a little bit south of the town of Windsor. So I think it's just maybe 1.5 miles or 2 miles up the road is when the Windsor High School, called Windsor High, I don't know. But yeah, great little town, lot of character, a lot of soul. People there are love their town, and just outside of town in the south there's these nice rolling hills where there's a number of different vineyards, and it's actually kind of in the flight path of the Sonoma County Airport too. Every time I'm out there in the vineyard, I'm always looking up and watching a plane flying overhead as they're coming in for a landing, and fortunately they always stay high enough that they never hit me yet, but yeah, it's a great spot.
Well, and Jill had a great question here asking, she noticed that we were saying that the vineyard is old, but our Farmhouse Zinfandel is a relatively new Zin in our portfolio. So kind of how did you make that decision to do a single vineyard Zin out of it, or how was it being used before we made it into a single vineyard Zin?
That's a good question. So it's always been a part of the heritage vine Zinfandel. And I'll have a confession. My first vintage here was 2011. If you don't recall, that was a very challenging vintage, probably the most challenging vintage of my winemaking career. It was a good thing I had a lot of experience because it was my debut vintage for Dry Creek Vineyard. And I had to put all my knowledge and experience to the test. But in any case, what made it challenging was it was a very cool year, and then we had a lot of rain before some of the fruit ripened. And I believe we may have even picked this vineyard before the rain, but because of the cooler year, it didn't show its best, and I wasn't all that impressed. And so I was kind of, what am I going to do with this vineyard? And we did some things where we changed some pruning in that vineyard. So we went to some shorter spurs. So it's without a visual, but it's the little stick you leave from a last year's shoot. So it's hardened off wood that has a couple of buds on it. And the shorter spurs, the idea was that we might get smaller clusters forming on that when that vineyard. And so maybe smaller clusters, maybe a little more concentration, get better quality and fruit out of that. And over the next couple years, 2 or 3 years, I really started realizing, this is a really good vineyard, and it's very different and has some very distinctive character that's different from our other estate vineyards. So so when the need came along for having another Zinfandel for the wine club and for the growing Zin lovers club, this was really high on my list. So I think 2015 was our debut vintage with this one. And I've continued to really love this vineyard as well. And we have to really keep an eye on it. It'll go from being ripe to overripe really fast. So we have to be ready to jump on it. Well, without further ado, maybe we can move on to wine number 3 here. So that's going to be our 2017 Beeson Ranch Zinfandel. And so let's give that a taste. I know this is one of our most popular and is loved by many of you, and with good reason. There's some really great spice array in this, some coriander and cumin, along with sort of, I get a little bit of cedar almost in the aroma and some berry syrup. And really, when I was tasting this earlier, I was thinking, I don't know why, but what came to mind to me was kind of like, I don't even know if I've got this right, but one of those, I think they're like called Black Forest cakes or whatever. They're kind of a chocolate cake that's rolled up. And sometimes you get this, creamy stuff sort of rolled in between the layers, but there's also maybe sort of like a cherry or fruit filling in there as well. So it's kind of like that chocolate and cherry and a little bit of creaminess in the texture that it's really making me hungry right now. But I just thought that was a great description for what I was tasting, and also a little bit of earthiness as well. And this is a really distinctive and historic vineyard. It was planted in the late 1800s and is well over 100 years, over 120 some years old by now, so I lost count. And it's, the exact date of its planting is sort of vague and lost in the mist of time. But if you're familiar with this area, it's just a little bit north of Madrona Manor on the west side of Dry Creek Valley, at the south end of the valley proper. And this is a shot from the vineyard as well. This is kind of at a lower elevation. You can see some slopes kind of in the background on either side. And this vineyard was part of a larger parcel of property that was actually included where Madrona Manor is now in the past. And then over the years, pieces were sold off to, sort of carved up. But it's close to 12 acres total on the property, and it basically kind of has these slopes that rise up from West Dry Creek Road, and then kind of both sort of slope down into a sort of a little bowl and a flat area that comes right out to the road. And there's a lot of diversity in this vineyard. Like a lot of old vine vineyards, it is a field blend vineyard. So it's Zinfandel with other red grape varieties scattered through it. I've been told by Paul Bernier, who farmed this for many years, that, in addition to Zinfandel, well, I know for sure that I've seen Petit Syrah scattered through that vineyard. And there is also a block of pure Petit Syrah planted at the top of one of the hills. But there is, a little bit of Petit scattered through there. I've seen for sure some vines that I suspect are Carignan. Carignan, looks a lot like Zinfandel, but maybe a little bit rounder berries. And a lot of times the vines are like giants. So when you're in one of these old vine vineyards, and you see a big vine that's sort of towering over the others, you might suspect that it's Carignan. You might have to get up close and check it out to be sure. And there's some subtle clues that you can look at, like the color change between the on the stem, between the vine, the cane on the vine, and the bunch itself. It's often very distinctive for Carignan and different from Zinfandel. And what else? So Paul Bernini mentioned an obscure variety called Negrette, or also known as Pinot Saint George, from the south of France, and you know, maybe some Revedra. There's even a couple of white vines scattered here or there. So a lot of these old vine vineyards had some white fruit that was you know, just peppered in there, and people would sometimes refer to it as a salt and pepper kind of combination. But it, you know, a lot of times in the old world, they might like to blend a few white grapes in there with some of the red grapes as well. So it was kind of in keeping with the European tradition in some areas. And because it's got so many different exposures, like, you know, one of the slopes is facing north and one's facing kind of, or wraps around from the east to south. And then you've got, you know, different elevations, so different fertility in the soil. So we usually do 2 or 3 picks of the Zinfandel every year. And typically the vines up at the top on the northern slope ripen first. Maybe some of the ones on the southern top of the hill as well. And then we'll, you know, get into the slopes themselves, the base of the slopes, and then the last piece is usually down at the bottom of the near the flat, near the road. But you know, and so it's also very complex to sample. So when I'm out there with people sampling the vineyard, as we're trying to decide when to pick, we carve it up into probably 5 or 6 different sections. It takes a long time. And of course, I just mentioned how we typically harvest it. And last year, you know, it was kind of the opposite. We picked some of the lower slopes and the flat earlier. In fact, this is a great shot. So this is from kind of the middle of the northern slope, looking across to where it dips down and then comes back up. And you can see in among those trees, there's some houses that belong to the Beeson family. And you can kind of see how the vines start at the top and then slope down the hill and wrap around the hill. And this is, you know, before any disking or cultivation had been done. But typically, you know, you'll have at least every other row cultivated and have this really loose kind of fluffy soil. In fact, I've got a vial of the soil right here. This is Beeson Ranch. And so we've had a long history with this vineyard too. Harry Beeson, he was a dentist here locally, and he and his family have owned this vineyard for many years. It's now under new ownership, but you know, they were really almost like family for Kim and Don and David Stair. They were, you know, had a long, great relationship, and so, you know, this is, you know, one that's very dear to our hearts. And you know, Sarah, if you might want to show, I think you have that one other shot that's from the top of a hill. I'm putting her on the spot, but sorry, I can't hear you, but.
Sorry, the power of mute button. Is it the one that we looked at? Yeah, is it the one that we looked at before that one?
Don't see it.
Sorry.
Don't worry. If you find it, we'll put it up, and if not, yeah. So this is at the top of the northern slope. So even further up than that previous photo that you saw, and so it's a close up of one of the old vines, but it's kind of there at the very top and kind of shows you where it goes down. So there's a, you know, this is a very difficult vineyard to farm as well. So it was planted back before we had tractors. So the spacing's a little tight, and that in combination with the steep slopes on some of these hills means you have to have a very, you know, unique and properly sized tractor. And not a lot of people have these. And you kind of have to have one that has they call it a crawler. It's basically kind of caterpillar treads, you might call it, or like a bulldozer, if you've seen those, where they have the metal tracks on them, and that's much more stable and able to crawl up and down those hills. and I've heard from Paul Bernier when he was farming this that you know, that I think a tractor sort of, I don't know if it was Paul himself or somebody else working for him was on the tractor, and it kind of got away from him and was sliding down the hill, and they didn't roll it, fortunately, and nobody was hurt, but you know, it's kind of a little bit of a risky undertaking. And you know, just to find somebody who has the right equipment and then the right heart for taking care of this vineyard is kind of challenging. And Paul Bernier is somebody that is kind of a local character, and we love him. He's 90% of the time he walks around in Birkenstocks, even when he's out in the vineyard. So he's like literally got his feet in the soil. Some of you, if you're local, you may even know that he and his family farm some vegetables as well. So you might find them at the farmer's market, and some really delicious vegetables, or even some of our local restaurants would feature some of their produce and some of their salads and so forth. So anyhow, kind of digressing, but it's just, you know, these vineyards have so much character, and the people farming them often are characters too.
Hey Tim, Bob was asking, how much life do the 100-year-old vineyards have left in them?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, you know, when these vines get older, they definitely are going to decline in productivity. But you get some really great balance and balanced, you know, fruit to what the vigor of the vine is capable of producing, and you really get some nice concentration of fruit. But you know, eventually, some of those vines are going to succumb to age and disease and so forth. And so, Beeson is a perfect example. You know, in the last few years, the owners have been through a program of replanting some of the old vines. So you kind of have to go through this cycle every once in a while of putting in some new cuttings, and often you know, typically you would maybe take some really good looking budwood from your own vineyard and plant that, you know, on some rootstock and grow it up. And this is on St. George rootstock, and that's what they've been using on the replants. So basically, you know, you've got a few young vines and a few old vines, you know, scattered through there. And so, you know, you're kind of looking at an average age of what this vineyard is. But if you want it to keep going, you do have to go through this, you know, periodic replant. But it's in a very small scale. You know, the majority of the vines are those nice, big, fat, hardy ones that you see that have been there for, you know, many, many years. But it also makes it sort of impossible to know exactly, is this the original vine? Is it, you know, is it 125 years old? Is it 85 years old? It's kind of hard to tell. It's not like a tree where we can look at the rings or something like that. But anyhow, I'm really glad to see that they're, you know, doing these replants so they keep the vineyard going, and we can keep enjoying this wine for many years to come.
That's great. And then Jill was also asking kind of a follow-up, is it usually a Zin vine that you see that's that big? Are there any other vines that are normally this large?
No, other vines could get that big as well. But we tend to have a lot of these old Zinfandel vines around because they were typically planted on St. George rootstock back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And that's a phylloxera-resistant rootstock. And other rootstocks have been used for other varieties that, in some cases, we thought maybe they were phylloxera-resistant, but they weren't. So the vines are, you know, have eventually been succumbed to disease. But yeah, it's just so that was kind of a fortunate quirk. But I have seen some old vineyards, like you know, I saw an old, actually head-trained Cabernet vineyard years ago, and those vines are big and thick and gnarly as well. And that's, for me, one of the really interesting aspects of these old vines is just how they become kind of these own sort of unique living sculptures. And it's really special. I mean, you're out there in these vineyards and you just feel kind of a soul of the place that's way different from younger vineyards, I think. But, you know, some of these older vineyards, like I'm looking out here through the window at some of the vineyards here, they have a lot of soul too. And I you know, as you work with them and you spend a lot of years walking the vineyard, you come to appreciate the personality of each one that you get to work with.
That's great. And then one kind of last question, Noelle was wondering if the Beeson vineyards are at a higher elevation than the other Zins. And then Rick was actually kind of wondering about hillside versus valley and wine quality. So I'm not sure if that's a good tie-in to that question with elevation.
Sure, I can take on both of those. So Beeson is not the highest elevation Zinfandel vineyard that we have. That honor would probably go to Bogenson Ranch. So, of course, we make a single vineyard bottling of that as well. And that, the elevation is somewhere between 800 to maybe 1,000 feet. And it does have some of the more challenging and extreme areas and slopes for farming. Beeson is probably at the upper highest point, I don't know, I would say maybe 400 feet, somewhere in there. I could be wrong, maybe a little higher. And it's probably a little higher because probably down in the valley floor is actually still, above sea level is probably a couple hundred feet. So, but yeah, it's sort of in the mid-range, I guess, I'd say of elevation for the different Zinfandel vineyards that we have. And then remind me, what was the second question?
Rick was wondering kind of the hillside versus valley in wine quality. What does that mean to you?
Well, basically for red wines in general and Zinfandel in particular, we would like some of the soils that are not the most fertile. Doesn't have to be the least fertile, but not the most vigorous soils. So those soils do tend to be down on the valley floor. But Dry Creek Valley here, it's kind of you kind of have to get used to the topography here because right along the creek there are some really low-lying areas, and in fact right behind the winery is one of those areas where the slope drops off a good, I don't know, maybe 80 to 100 feet or more down to some rich bottom soil, which is kind of where we tend to want to grow something like Sauvignon Blanc. But up here where the winery is situated and along the east side of the valley, there's some elevated areas, some benchland basically, and it's got more well-drained soil. It's not extremely weak soil by any means, but it's better for growing reds like Zinfandel. But it's not really, some of it's sort of a plateau almost. It's not always hills, but a lot of it is rolling hills. And then, on the west side of the valley, you get into some really rocky, steeper slopes, so places like Beeson or Bogenson. And, those are really great for some Zinfandel too. And they'll throttle down the vines a little bit less and make them less vigorous and be lower yielding vineyards. So you really get distinctive personalities from the fruit from those different regions. So, areas like where we're sitting here at the winery, as you're driving by, it looks like, oh, kind of flat. Yeah, we're on the valley floor. I can see some hills, surrounding us on the east and the west. But it's really some elevated, better drained, rockier soil that's good for reds as well. So it's not a simple sort of binary question about is it valley or hillside. Sometimes it's sort of in between.
Great. And before we move on to the 2018 Old Vine Zin, Kevin was asking which 2017 Zin is your personal favorite?
Well, I have to say I really like the 2017 Old Vine. That's been one that I've been enjoying over the past year. But these are all really good, but I have to say that today out of these three, the summer's really impressed me too. So I give that 2 thumbs up. I like that one a lot.
Perfect. Well, let's move on to the 2018, and then I know that there's still some questions out there, so we'll round about the questions into the next wine.
Yeah, well, so the 2018 Old Vine will give us a chance to talk about a different vintage and just some Old Vine vineyards in general. Whereas 17 was characterized by some, high heat spikes, 18 was kind of a cooler vintage overall. So again, it was a little bit later start to harvest than we've been experiencing in recent years. And we essentially ended up with some higher acids because of the cooler weather. So, we'll have some nice acid structure in these wines and a little bit lower sugars than normal. So, Zinfandel being Zinfandel, it still gets, fairly ripe, partly because of the sort of uneven ripening, and you have to sort of judge, based on an average of what you think the bunches are doing and across the whole vineyard. But it really showed up it will show up in the 2018 Cabernet and Bordeaux Reds. We had, more, majority of our Cabernets from, usually our Cabernets around 14.1, 14.2% alcohol, but we had quite a number of Cabernet lots from 2018 that were under 14% alcohol. And in general, I think we've got in this vintage, it's not quite as concentrated and dense as the 2017, but a little more elegance and finesse and balance in this. And, sometimes these vintages that don't impress you as being sort of gutsy and blockbusters, they can really turn out to be some of the ones that age the best. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I wouldn't be surprised if, 15, 20 years down the road, we're tasting some of these 2018s and perhaps the 2018 Old Vine and saying, wow, those wines have aged very well. Yeah, so jumping into the 2018 Old Vine, the blend here is 80% Zinfandel. We've got, I think I've got this percentages right. So 19% Carignan and 1%, or sorry, 19% Petit Syrah, 1% Carignan. And kind of gives me an opportunity to talk about the why Carignan in this wine. So as I mentioned in a lot of these old vine vineyards, when we're talking about Beeson, the Carignan is typically a vine that showed up in a lot of these old vineyards. And Beeson is not by any means the only vineyard that's a field blend. A lot of these vineyards are mixed. This 2018, some of the vineyards that we worked with were Beeson, Fortini, another great wine growing family with a great old vine vineyard on the Eastern Bench. We had a small vineyard. It was actually the last year for this vineyard because the owner got out of farming and the vineyard's gone away, but Kowalski, so a very small vineyard, and that one just had all kinds of different grapes scattered in there with the Zinfandel. There's also Buchignani, farmed by Jojo and Susie Garcia, two people that we love, and they've got some great mix of different vines, scattered through the Zinfandel. There's a small section of Voganson with some head train vines that we use as well, and then Hamar Ranch is where this Carignan comes from. And so I was looking for a number of years ago for some more additional old vine Zinfandel that we needed, and had been told about this vineyard that we were going to go look at. So we went and looked at it, and we ended up, buying that fruit and still do buy it today. But as just in passing, as we're driving through the vineyard, the guy showing it to me said, "Yeah, this is a block of Carignan. It was planted in 1904, and just kind of there it is." And I kind of did a double take and said, "Oh, 1904, let's go take a look." And so we did, and because I knew of its history with Zinfandel, and so I thought, you don't usually find a block of just Carignan, and actually over the years I figured out it's not just Carignan. There's some other stuff mixed in there too, but it's a field blend too, but it's a lot of Carignan, and so I thought it would be really fun to work with that on its own, and it's this old vineyard, and maybe it'd be a nice component. And so we've continued to get a very small amount of Carignan from this old vine block every year, and it's part of the Old Vine Zin. Sometimes we have a little left over and we sneak it into the Heritage Zin as well. But the Carignan has a lot less spice, just a lot more pure fruit, and sometimes not quite as tannic a structure as Zin or Petit Syrah might have. It's really kind of nice, round, and smooth. And I know we did. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, we did a barrel tasting where we kind of had pieces of the Old Vine Zin, and we had a barrel of Carignan, and of course everybody said, well, why don't you bottle that on its own? But we have a very small amount available, and so it's a great blender for our Old Vine Zin. And I was talking about these different vineyards, they all have unique personalities. Another really interesting aspect of these old vines is that a lot of times, as they get really big and old, the actual living tissue of the vine is on the outside of the vine. And so the interior is not really necessarily alive anymore and conducting water or nutrients out of the soil. And I've seen some vines where you can actually sort of see through the vine, like there's spaces. And I've been told by someone in the vineyard that termites actually get up in there in that tissue that's not living anymore and kind of eat it out. And sometimes that's why you get sort of these see-through vines. So it's really kind of funky and cool. And you look at that and goes, how's that vine still alive? But it's still doing it. It's hanging in there. And the other thing I really liked about, and here's a great example. You can't really see through this one necessarily, but you can see how craggy it is. You kind of see it in the foreground of the vine. You can kind of see a couple of areas where it looks like arms of the vine were lopped off. Sometimes you have to sort of perform surgery on these old guys. If you get a particular arm that is either growing in a way that's sort of out of position or gets some disease. A lot of times the disease enters, like Eutypa enters from, a pruning cut, and then works its way down into the vine. If you cut it off soon enough, you might be able to save the vine. And you have to train out a new shoot later to replace what you just cut off. They're just great old soldiers in these vineyards, and unique personalities, like I said, to everyone as well. I think I lost my train of thought, so sorry, but I get excited about these old vines, and I could go on and on for a long time. So what I was going to try to say was our selection of old vine vineyards is kind of all up and down the valley. So we have sort of a broad temperature gradient throughout the valley. So at the north end, it can be as much as 10 degrees hotter on any given day than at the south end. Where we're at in the winery is kind of about the mid-valley area. And so you kind of see this progression of vineyards that we have some like Bucagani in the north. They're one of the first ones to be picked. And then we just work our way south through all the Zinfandel vineyards. And so, ones like, Easton Ranch for the old vine is one of the later picks that we do. And Bogenson is often one of the earliest as well, often the first that we pick. So, we have this kind of nice broad survey of all the different qualities that Dry Creek Valley has to offer. So some really nice, ripe, concentrated fruit from the north, and maybe a little more elegant and peppery fruit from the south, like Easton has a lot of spice, and just really builds in some nice complexity into the wine.
So Tim, we have a couple of questions that we might want to hit. We have a question of what, in terms of old vine zins, kind of what wine characteristics differentiate Dry Creek Valley zins from others, like, for example, Lodi zins?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, I'd say that, in my career, I have made Zinfandel from other areas. I worked with a lot of Zinfandel vineyards in Sonoma Valley previously, and before that, even a little bit in Napa Valley as well. And Zinfandel has kind of become the unique European grape that gained fame in California. So it's really, in some ways, it's the European immigrant who came to the U.S. and hit it big. But having said that, I really think after working with Zinfandel from multiple different regions, that Dry Creek Valley really is the best. And I'm not just saying that because I work here. I've really just been amazed and understand why we have that reputation for Zinfandel. I think we just have here a unique combination of some really warm summer days, but really good cool nights that really suits Zinfandel. And so, we are just at the right climate where, a little bit cool here at the southern end, and that we get that nice cool fog coming in from the south and through the canyons on the west of us at night, and sort of cooling things down, putting a nice little blanket of cloud cover over the valley, and then it recedes during the day, and we get some nice heat. And that in combination with our really rocky iron-rich soils here, just, I don't know if I can fully explain it, but it's really Zinfandel heaven. And there's a unique, I think a unique spice to Dry Creek Valley Zinfandels that I don't get even from Russian River Valley to our south. You can get some spiciness there, but it's for here in Dry Creek we get I think it's sort of like coriander, cumin, cardamom, sometimes a little sometimes black and white pepper, but it's kind of this other unique spice mix. Those first three, maybe some allspice, as part of that as well, and then just some really vibrant fruit, and that combination and good structure in the wines, it's just great Zinfandel. You know, an area like Lodi, it tends to be a little bit hotter overall. And so you tend to get kind of riper end of spectrum of flavors in Lodi. And, you know, a place like Russian River Valley, you know, maybe a slightly less ripe, a little brighter acidity, maybe a little more kind of bright red sort of fruit characters, and maybe not as much as the darker fruit characters that we might get here in Dry Creek Valley.
And what would you pair the old vine with for eating?
Fine, yeah, that's a good question. You know, this one, because of it has a certain elegance to it, I was thinking of, I really like grilling chicken at home. We do that a lot. And a lot of times I use thighs because I like that they stay more moist than breast. And, you know, just kind of some nice salt and pepper, and maybe you know, a little bit of like either oregano, if you have some fresh herbs, put on there, or some rosemary. We always have rosemary around the house. So I often, you know, throw that on there and you know, just throw it on the grill and get it, you know, nice and smoky, maybe a little wood chips if you want to add a little smoke. And so that nice smoky chicken, I think would be great with this, something like that. You know, or maybe even something like a grilled portobello. I think that would really bring out the fruit and make it sort of pop nicely, that earthiness of the mushroom. So
Perfect.
that's what's for dinner, right?
I know, I was going to say, it's just making me hungry, and we should wrap this up so everyone can get to their dinner unless they're already snacking along. But we did have one question that I was wondering if you'd be able to answer kind of concisely or not. Douglas was asking, how does the specific rootstock affect the characteristics of the grafted cuttings? And I thought that was a really good question, since we're going over kind of heritage and old vine today.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty big topic. But basically, so some rootstocks are what we call devigorating rootstocks. So they will actually produce a less vigorous vine. So just a vine that has, you know, maybe less leaf, you know, smaller leaves, or less, you know, the shoots don't grow as long. Others may lend more vigor. And so that can be you would select a rootstock based on your soil, your growing region, what the specifics are of your vineyard, and what is suited to that. And then you also look at the variety. Some varieties are more vigorous than others. You know, Sauvignon Blanc can get really big and bushy, for example. Or, you know, I talked about Carignan, giants, you know, right? So so you have to kind of look at your soil and your variety and pick the right rootstock to suit that. And then, of course, you're also dealing with different diseases and pests. So, you know, you might have a vineyard that has a lot of nematodes, or, you know, we're always worried about phylloxera, right? So we always want a phylloxera-resistant rootstock. Other areas might have more susceptibility to, you know, different viruses, like grapevine leaf roll. And so you might select a rootstock that confers some resistance to that. I know there's a lot of work on, you know, because Pierce's disease has become a real problem in recent years, a lot of work on rootstocks that will confer, we hope, some Pierce's disease resistance to the vine that we graft onto it. So, you know, in short, you know, the rootstock really can have some effect. Now, you know, if you get into specifics of flavor, I've never seen any studies that can really tell me, you know, if you use this rootstock, you're going to get, you know, like cherry and spice in your vine, and if you use that rootstock, you're going to get boysenberry and chocolate. You know, it's I don't think we can be that specific. It's kind of too complex of a puzzle anyway. But it will influence the growth characteristics of the vine. And so, you know, based on what your goal is, your wine style, your site, and your soil, the different disease pressures that you encounter, then you try to make the best pick, and hopefully you get it right. We've got a lot of experience, so we can get some help from experts and make a good choice.
Perfect. Well, Lee and Eugenia Steffens want to put you on the spot, and they say that you know what their question is.
Oh, is it going to be about late harvest Zinfandel? You yes. Characters. Well, hi, Lee and Eugenia. I really appreciate knowing you're out there. And yeah, so soon, I hope, I guess that's the most specific I'm going to be, but we've got some promising stuff in the barrel that I think we might just be able to satisfy your thirst for that late harvest Zin.
Perfect. So before we wrap this up, somebody was asking, let's see who it was. Kent was talking about how did we become the nautical vineyard, and that could be a whole webinar all on its own. But I did find a fun little picture that I wanted to share that shows kind of how long we've been involved in sailing and the nautical world. Let me share my screen here with you. So you can see a picture of Dave on the boat. And so we've actually had sailboats on our label since 1982, and it really just combines the family's love for sailing and for wine. And so that's just kind of a fun little thing of why we've had it on there, but maybe we'll do a webinar on that one day with Dave and Kim, and they can tell us all about it. But we also had a couple of questions for you guys, just concerned about how we're doing and how the winery is doing. And so just wanted to let you know that we're doing the absolute best that we can right now, and we're working the absolute hardest that we can to be able to communicate with you guys and to make sure that the wine quality is still absolutely stellar. We thank you for each and every order. We thank you for your continued club membership. That's really what gives us hope and gives us a lot of encouragement to keep going and keep working through all this. And we just hope you all are staying safe and staying healthy. And if you need more wine, we know where we can help you with that. Tim, do you have anything to say in closing?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to add that we love all of you, and we really appreciate that you give us the opportunity to do what we get to do. And for me, I think I've got the greatest job in the world. What's not to love about this? I get to make some great wines, and I get to share it with great people like all of you. So, I'm really, again, looking forward to the day when we can see each other in person. And I wish the technology sort of allowed for a little bit more directly interactive experience where I could sort of be looking you in the eye. I want to share my deep appreciation. And yeah, I hope you enjoy these wines, and looking forward to doing more of this too.
Yep, we have a few more coming up, so watch your emails, everyone. And if you haven't joined our Facebook Wine Club group, that's a great way to know when all these things are happening. So stay safe, and we will see you all again soon. Yep, bye-bye.
Take care.